G'day. This week there was a new arrival in the workshop. I replaced my clamp kit with a different clamp kit of the same size, and that's just for compatibility reasons, but it made me think that probably no one's done a video on clamping, and although it's pretty straightforward, there are a couple of tricks to it, and there's also a few things that after having used one for many years I can suggest to people, so this is about that. Towards the end I do a little bit of machining and show a couple of original ideas for making your life easier, so see how you go. This is my new arrival. It's actually a bit beaten up and second-hand Teco clamp set. Teco's a US brand. Majority of clamp sets you get in Australia are an import arrangement, and they're pretty good value for money, but the problem I had was that I had several spare parts and the angles of these blocks are slightly different, and so it made putting on the straps just that little bit awkward and sometimes a bit dangerous, so I decided I was going to standardise on one brand. If it wasn't for the fact that I've got a few special bits and pieces, I probably would have just bought a second import set, but it is what it is. Clamp kits all use some form of T-nut to hold things down. These ones here are 1/2-inch T-nuts. These ones here are an 11/16 nut, but with a special thread in there for my setup here. I've talked about that one before. But there are a couple of things that can go wrong here. One of them is that if you have a stud in the T-nut and you've got it there and you put a lot of force on particularly on smaller machines, you can get that to spall out, chip out and break your table. So you need to be careful that you're not over tightening these things. The other thing that can happen is that typically these T-nuts have got the last thread or two have been purposely distorted so the nut won't go through, because what can happen with these is that if you have them sitting in a T-slot and you don't realize you're at the bottom of the thread and you keep winding it down, once again you can jack the T-nut up, which can cause damage to your table. So just something to bear in mind there. If you're not, if the stud doesn't stop on the nuts, you can get something like a center punch and just distort a thread or two and that'll fix it. Typically these things are made out of a low carbon steel, what we'd call mold steel, 1018, something like 1020, that sort of thing, and possibly case hardened, black oxide finished. The nice idea about that is that if you've got that sitting on a part and you run into it with your cutter, you're not going to do horrible things to your cutter. You'll just be a little bit embarrassed by the damage on the end of the tip. So what that also means is that if you've got bits and pieces like this and you're missing a few parts, nut, stud, all that sort of thing, you can easily make your own. Some people would say, well, can you use a bolt in there? Yes, you can, but there's only a limited amount of thread in there, maybe a diameter and a half, and so if you get the bolt right to the bottom, it's going to hang on pretty well. But if the length of what you're clamping plus the bolt is not right, you might only get a thread or two of engagement. So you're better off using a stud and then using the nut up the top there to adjust. Just running through some of the parts here. This is usually called a step block, and you've got straps with serrations on the back which match, and they just sit in there like so. These things are not flat, they're actually cut back, and so that is when that clamps down, it's actually pulling in rather than just sort of sitting there, because if you gave it a knock, it might fly free. You've also got various lengths of stud, nuts, typically with a flange on them, and you could make those by say soldering or brazing a washer onto a normal nut. You've also got typically the T-slot nuts. They can be used on a table and also on angle plates and things like that, so they come in quite handy. The other thing you see, and you may not realise what they're a joining nut. And so what that means, if you've got two studs, you want a longer stud than you've got, you can join two studs together. But there are actually a couple of other uses for these things, which I'll show you. So let's just mention a couple of things that aren't in the typical clamp kit that you might want to think about. One is some small studs. Now, typically in a clamp kit they start around about 3 inches long, 76 millimeters, but a few smaller sizes are handy. If you've just got to clamp something, you know, flat like a fence or something like that to the table, you don't want a long stud. You can get past with a small one. Also, if you're clamping a vise down, you might want a small stud there. Now, as I said, these aren't anything particular, so you can probably get a bit of all thread and just cut some out to suit what you want to do. Nuts, you usually get 6 nuts in a clamp kit. The trouble is, if you use then two of those to hold your vise down, you've only got 4. So you want to get some more nuts, and as I said, you could solder a washer on if you can't find flange nuts. Some kits have them and some kits don't, but a T-nut cleaner, and that just goes in there and turns sideways, and you can use that to scrape out the swarf and things in there. I vacuum my mill table most times, so I don't use this terribly often, but every so often if you've got some swarf on there, you need to put another nut in or something like that, that could be worth having. They don't have any fences on them. I showed how to make some fences a few videos back on my bootstrapping a mill videos, but just a bit of bar with some holes that line up with your T-slots is all you need, but that can come in handy. The other thing they don't come with is a dedicated spanner. Now, if you've got a tool chest with a whole bunch of spanners in, that's really great, but going there all the time to get the spanner out is a pain in the neck. So I've actually got another spanner. It lives on a hook by the drill press, because that's got T-slots on it as well. But this doesn't get put away in the tool chest. It stays out because I'm always using it for putting things onto the mill table. The next question is, I guess, how do you use these things? And it's one of those bits of knowledge that everybody assumes you know how to do it or you can work it out. Well, yes, but it does help to have a little bit of inside knowledge. So, stud on the T-nut, and you can put the stud in after you put the T-nut in. Strap goes on like that. Now, tip 1. You want this end of the strap to be slightly higher than the work. So the way I normally do it is like that. Hold that so it's flat, and then I lift that up a little bit just so that I can get that onto the steps. Okay, and then it's a matter of putting the nut down on there. You want to try and keep your studs as short as you can, just so that you don't run cutters into them. One of the things that you don't get told necessarily is where to put these studs. You want them as close as you can to the work, and that's simply because the downward force that the nut generates and the upward forces from the work and the step block are equal. And so if you have this more towards the work, there's more force here than there is here, and so you're getting better clamping force. But that's basically setting up a step block. Now, what you can also do is put another block on there like that, and it doesn't have to be the same size. It can be a small one, it can be a big one. If you've got something tall, you can put 2 big ones together and get right up. But what that means is you can also put your clamp like that. And a lot of people forget that. They think, oh, a step block, I've got to use the serrated end. No, you don't. You can use it like this. But what that also lets you do is, if instead of having this sticking out the back here, it might mean that you can have it, sticking out the side, which if you tight on space, that might help. I did mention earlier that there was another use for these joiner nuts. What you can do is, if you've got a small piece of studding, which is another reason to have them, and you put a nut on the end like that, effectively you've got a make-do jack stand, machinist jack. And so if you want to clamp down, a thin strap like this, you could put that on top and then put a clamp on top, and if you need to adjust it, you just wind the nut down or something like that. So that's a handy trick to remember, because it can get you out of trouble. And I use that occasionally when I haven't got a machinist jack to hand, or if I need a smallish one, as in that sort of diameter. The other thing worth remembering, which I said these clamp kits don't have but sort of do, is You don't have to use the straps as straps always. You can use them as a fence. So in this particular case, I'd probably have a bolt through the hole there, and I might have another clamp just holding the end down there, so I've got 2 points of support. But you can use those. And they are especially useful too if you've got, using that end there, you can use that for thin stock. So if you have to bring the cutter in, you've got some clearance for the cutter. So that's another one worth remembering. A couple of things I've made up which help me in my clamping, so I'll pass them on and hopefully they'll be of use to you. One of them is this thing. This is a washer that I've made up to help clamp down things like this vise. And it's a nice thick washer, so it's not going to bend and distort very easily. It's also got this sleeve in here, and as well as stiffening things up, that also helps centralize a little bit in that slot. So I would suggest that, if you've got a spare few moments, whip a couple of those up on the lathe. I think they're worth doing. I've got this device that I made up, and that sits across, and if you can imagine, this is my rotary table, that sits up there like that. So when the rotary table is flat, I don't have to get a strap and a T-nut and a stud and a nut and a step block to clamp things down. I can just come along with a pre-assembled stud like that, and that just happens to be the same height. Purely coincidence, wouldn't have dreamed of planning it like that. Slide that in there and that'll clamp that down. So, I don't need to have a special clamp, and so that makes it very quick and easy to put the rotary table on. Another thing that I've got, and one day I'm going to finish these, is I've got some bits of plate like that. And that's so if I'm clamping something down and I need to have a step clamp right where the slot is, I can put one of these here, and that'll just give me a nice flat surface for that step clamp to sit on. Sorry, for that step block to sit on. So just something to have. That's probably what, a 4 or 5 millimeter thick piece of steel. Nothing terribly special, but that helps. Occasionally I have the situation where I've got a T-nut there and a T-nut there. I've got something clamped down, and then I think, oh, I need to put another clamp in here. All right. This is something I saw in a Teco catalogue. They're the same company who made that clamp kit. And the way that works is it goes in, and then you turn it, and these flanges then sit underneath the T-slot, and you've got a nut. It's not as strong, it hasn't got the bearing area of a proper T-nut, but for just a little bit of extra clamping, it's a good idea. So I've made up a couple of those. I couldn't buy from them for, well, probably a couple of reasons, but one of them being that my mill, while it takes a 11/16 T-nut, which on a metric mill is quite odd anyway, I've adapted everything to be a 3/8 hole, so they don't make one of these, so I've got to make my own. The other thing that I didn't like about their design was that it was like that, and there wasn't much meat hanging on there to underneath the T-slot. So what I'm doing is I'm actually putting much more of an angle there, and then to accommodate the lip on my T-slots, I'm actually taking the corner off, and that gives me a lot more area, and that will give me a 45-degree turn, but will lock it in and give me enough area that I don't feel like I'm going to pull the slot out. I've now got my blank with a hole through the middle and the two sides chamfered off. Now, the hole through the middle was a brilliant plan I had that didn't work right. I thought what I might be able to do is put that onto a rod, and then using my 45-degree square, just line that up so that would all machine off. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough stuff down here to grip, and so that plan didn't work. So what I've now done, I've got a half-inch piece of tool steel in there, and I'm using that, and that when that's clamped up, that comes up to about there somewhere, and that's enough to be able to clamp that, and then very carefully by hand feeding through there. Once I've got all of the blocks like that, I'll then pop this up 6 millimeters and come off and chew off that corner. There are my nuts with the corners trimmed off, so they sit in the slight undercut of my T-slot. I've also come along with a file and just rounded that corner. When I put that in there, and I expected this, and rotated that round, it would jam because of that corner. So I've just used a file just to take a little bit of stuff off there, make that into more of a radius. I'm just about to tap, but as you can see, they go in and they twist, which is what they're meant to do. So yeah, I guess 1/8 of a turn T-nuts. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you for the next one.